To those unfamiliar with the Amish of the United States, these children might look as if they're dressed up to take part in a period drama. But this is their everyday dress, an outward reflection of the values and beliefs of their community. For the Amish shun the lifestyle of modern America and cling to their past. Not only have they maintained their cultural heritage, but they share a common ancestry that can be traced back many generations, a rare opportunity for studies in human genetics. Today, there are more than 50,000 Amish scattered in small communities throughout the United States. Over 80% of them live in Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. One of the largest settlements is in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where about 12,000 Amish live. Their ancestors were followers of Jacob Amman, who founded the Amish sect as a religious offshoot from the Mennonites, an older Protestant group. Most of the current population in Lancaster County are descendants of a few hundred Amish immigrants who fled to America from the Swiss-German border around 1750 to escape religious persecution. Since their arrival, the Amish have remained close-knit as a farming community. Although they usually choose to avoid contact with outsiders, Market Day is an exception. It's one of the few occasions when Amish are seen mingling with other Americans. Those that follow the lifestyle of the founders most closely are known as Old Order Amish. They're easily picked out from the rest by their distinctive form of dress and speech. Among themselves, they still speak a German dialect. There has been some defection over the years, especially from among the young. Their strict moral code means that attraction to more liberal groups is strong. But despite some losses, their numbers have increased naturally by population expansion and not by receiving new converts to their religion. As far as possible, Old Order Amish run their farms without the aid of modern technology. Although their old-fashioned farming methods are labor-intensive, they help to keep a tight family unit. Usually, their homes are without electricity or telephone, and ownership of modern devices is forbidden. Every aspect of their way of life is steeped in tradition. They see resistance to change as a means of retaining their isolation. It's this isolation that has had an important bearing on their development and is one reason that the Amish are of interest to geneticists. There are many features of their lifestyle that contribute towards binding them close together as a community. For instance, their children are educated in small, private schools by Amish teachers. They're only taught up to the age of 14 and learn things that will be of practical use to them. Even their form of transport plays a part. Slow and ill-suited to modern highways, it keeps their range of contacts small. Almost without exception, they marry locally within the Old Order community. Their practice of intermarrying is another reason why the Lancaster County Amish are ideal for studying human genetics, because it means they've formed a closed population. Although they've avoided marriage between blood relatives, such as brother and sister or first cousins, marriages between second cousins have been frequent. As a consequence of inbreeding, they share a common genetic inheritance. Some people are related several times over. Because they have large families of 8 or 9 children, there is a greater opportunity than usual for spotting inherited characteristics. Their family records are exceptional in that most Amish in Lancaster County can trace their lineage back to the original founders. The few outsiders who may have introduced new genes are identified by name. The predominance of certain surnames illustrates the extent of their blood relatedness. Over 3/4 of the current population of Lancaster County Amish are accounted for by the surnames of only 6 of the original founders. At least 1/4 share the name Stoltzfus. Although the spelling varies, it's the same family. An indication of how certain founders have contributed disproportionately to the present-day gene pool. Geneticists have been studying the effect of such factors on the distribution and frequency of certain genes in the Amish population. Dr. Wilma Bias.
A useful beginning in studying a population like the Amish is to learn something about their genetic background. This can be done with a single blood sample from which we can type approximately 30 to 35 genetic systems, such as the blood groups, the ABO system, the RH system, and many others. In the laboratory, the blood sample is subjected to analysis using several different techniques. For example, for red cell antigens, such as the ABO system, we use an agglutination test. The red cell enzymes and various serum proteins can be typed using electrophoresis on various kinds of gel. From the analysis of the blood samples, we can determine the frequencies of the various alleles of these genetic systems. As an example, the Rh negative frequency in the Amish is 25%. The frequency of the Rh negative allele in the parent population in Switzerland is about 15%. So the Amish have deviated over time for several reasons. One, the population is small. Two, it has a limited number of founders. This could be founder effect, that is, more Rh negative genes were brought in by the approximately 400 founders, or it could be because of genetic drift. Genetic drift is a random variation that occurs from generation to generation. If the direction of drift is the same for a number of generations, then the frequency can actually be seen to change.
Regular visits are made up to Lancaster County to collect blood samples from Amish families that have volunteered to take part in genetic studies. Catching the whole family together often means visiting before work begins on the farm and before the children go to school. The farms are usually situated on unmarked country roads and are not easy to find without an Amish guide. For an outsider, being admitted into an Amish home is a rare privilege that John Hopkins staff never take for granted.
Mr. Lapp, if you'll give me your arm here, that lovely big vein stuff.
I wonder, that's not heredity then, that's mostly from working.
It might be heredity, a little bit, but I think people who do a lot of farming. Okay, open your fist
Want to keep some for me today?
and keep pressure on that. Sure, you got plenty left. Well, if you give blood at the blood bank, that's a pint, and this is only 20 cc's, which a pint is 500 cc. What we're doing is studies on the genetic inheritance of people, and we look at all the inherited markers that you can look for in blood cells, and there's probably 100 to 150 that we can look at.
What are some?
Well, for example, the red blood types are the ones that people are most familiar with, like A and B and O and RH. And the reason that we're interested in using Amish families is because, number one, they have very large families, and the other thing is that the Amish have the genealogical records in the Fisher Book, so that if we find an unusual blood marker, we can trace your lineage back through the Fisher Book and see how you're related to other people that we've tested for that marker. Okay, who wants to be next?
I'll be next, right?
Mrs. Lapp, can you make a fist for me?
And then work as hard as
keep
I don't have any veins.
keep your arm straight and put your other fist underneath your arm. That'll keep it nice and straight for me. Let's see. Oh, you have a pretty good vein there.
Studies on Amish blood groups have shown that their distribution varies among Amish from different parts of the country. In Lancaster County, 3/4 of the Amish population have blood type A. O is unusually low. Here they also found a rare blood group called Kell that is not found in other Amish communities and is extremely rare in the outbred American population. An Amish woman was the first Kell-positive person detected in Lancaster County. Subsequent testing showed that some of her brothers and sisters and other relatives were also carrying the Kell gene. It had been passed on to the next generation and could be traced further back in previous generations to a Frenchman, Isaac Houillard. He was one of the last converts to the Amish religion, and his genes are among the few new contributions to the Lancaster Amish gene pool.
From the pedigrees, we can also determine whether 2 or more genes might be situated on the same chromosome by tracing those genes from parent to child or through 3 or more generations, grandparent, parent to child, and observing concordant inheritance. This is very important if we have a new gene or a newly recognized disease that occurs in this population. Our pedigree analysis also tells us the level of inbreeding in the population and just how related 2 individuals might be, whether it's a married couple or whether it is 2 persons carrying the same trait that appear to be less closely related.
Kathy, is that the pedigree of the family that you're visiting this week?
This is the Lapp family. I'm just finishing it up now. The red lines here that I've drawn are the direct relationships, the direct degree of consanguinity between the husband and the wife. As you can see, there's quite a bit.
Looks like a typical Amish family.
I think the next thing to do with this pedigree is to...
Inbreeding tends to proliferate the ancestral pool of genes. And because the Amish have large families, there is a greater possibility than usual for 2 copies of the same gene to be passed on to a descendant. In double dose, some genes cause what are called recessive diseases. Although rare in the outbred population, inbred groups like the Amish suffer from a number of such rare diseases, as Professor Victor McCusick discovered.
The first condition in general terms that we studied among the Amish was dwarfism, because we understood that dwarfism was unusually frequent in the Amish. In fact, we found that there were 2 frequent forms of dwarfism. One was a condition called, after the names of the pediatricians who described it, the Ellis-Van Creveld syndrome, or 6-fingered dwarfism, because this has extra fingers associated with it as an absolutely consistent feature. This is inherited as a recessive condition. We found a very large number of cases among the Amish, limited to the Amish of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. In fact, in our initial report in 1964, we reported 50 cases among the Amish, and at one fell swoop doubled the world's literature on this particular condition.
All families affected by Ellis-Van Creveld syndrome can trace their ancestry back to Samuel King through more paths than to any other ancestor. Either he or his wife is thought to have brought in the Ellis-Van Creveld gene. In this family pedigree, a son and his aunt are affected. The extent of inbreeding is shown by the number of married couples that are consanguineous. That is, they have at least one ancestor in common. The double dose of the gene could have been passed to the son by one of several routes, through both his mother's and father's line of descent. His grandparents and all 4 great-grandparents are descended from Samuel King and his wife. The present frequency of the gene in the Lancaster County Amish may be as high as 1 in 14, whereas perhaps only one person carried the gene amongst the original founders. The other form of dwarfism that McCusick found had not previously been described in medical literature. Kendra Stoltzfus has this condition called cartilage hair hyperplasia. Her family are not followers of the Old Order faith, but they are of Amish descent. Because cartilage hair hyperplasia was a newly recognized condition, information was collected from as many families as possible to establish the clinical symptoms.
Mr. and Mrs. Stoltzfus, how old was Kendra when you first realized that she was going to be shot?
Well, she was about a year old.
Very good indeed. Could I have a look at your hands, please? And spread your fingers apart. You have a marvelous spread of your fingers, really 180 degrees between your fifth finger and your thumb. How many brothers and sisters do you have, Kendra?
I have an older brother and an older sister, and we're each about a foot apart. My brother's about 6 feet, and my sister's about 5, and I'm about 4 feet.
And do you have anyone in your close relatives who are short of stature?
No.
Mm-hmm.
No, I do
None at all. Mrs. Stoltzfus, I wondered if there are any short people on your side of the family or on your husband's.
The only one I can think of is a cousin. One of my first cousin's daughters is small. Now, she is not a dwarf, but she's very short. I would say maybe 4'8", something like that.
And how about the two of you? Your maiden name was Stoltzfus
Yes.
also, and but do you know of any blood relationship between the two of you?
Yes, we're second cousins.
I see. Since your name is Stoltzfus, I presume that you have Amish ancestry, and that we'll be able to locate your ancestors and other relatives in the Amish genealogy. But I need to know the names of your parents, Mrs. Stoltzfus.
Okay, my parents are John J. and Sarah Yoder Stoltzfus.
Okay, we have them, and I can trace them back. And Mr. Stoltzfus, your ancestors? The genealogical studies, of course, were very important to establish the genetics of this disorder, which were recessive. And the use of the excellent genealogies that the Amish have was a great help in that aspect of the studies. As it turned out, the features that were distinctive about the condition were very characteristic X-ray changes in the bones, which we see here on Kendra Stoltzfus, for example, here at age 4 and here at age 8, and these changes at the ends of the metaphyses, as we call them, are very characteristic changes. Also, the fine caliber of the hair under the microscope is a very characteristic change, but all of these pointed to a new disorder. And we knew, furthermore, that this had to be a new disorder because we had a catalog by this time of all the known recessive disorders up to that time. In fact, of all the simply inherited disorders, be they dominant, recessive, or X-linked. This is a catalog that we have maintained here at Johns Hopkins and first published in 1966. It has recently gone into its 7th edition and increasing greatly in size over the years as new disorders are recognized and described. Delineating new rare recessive diseases is not mere stamp collecting because these are diseases that occur in all groups, not just in the Amish. And, for example, I can illustrate this by the fact that Pat Bylan, who may be known to many because he played E.T. in the movie of that name, had cartilage hair hypoplasia, as we now know, and many other non-Amish people, of course, who have this condition. Another reason why studying this disorder among the Amish is very useful is that one can be absolutely certain that one is dealing with precisely the same mutant gene in all cases. When you collect cases of a given recessive disorder, let us say, from the general population, you can't be certain that it's precisely the same mutation in all cases. It may be different genetic causes of what appears to be one and the same disease. Knowing that this is the same disease, you then can look at how does this vary from one individual to another individual, and it does vary a good deal among the Amish. When we traced back the ancestry of these individuals, it was quite clear that quite a number of the founder immigrants must have been carrying the gene. It turned out that this was very widespread in Amish groups, not limited to the Amish of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, but found in those of Ohio and those in Indiana and in other areas.
Compare that with the family that Dr. McCusick asked me to look at the other day, the Kendra Stoltz's family. Notice there's much less consanguinity. Her grandparents, or their grandparents, were brother and sister, and their great-great-grandparents were brothers. But other than that, the only direct relationship is with the founders.
They don't look any more consanguineous than a couple from the outbred population that has a child with a recessive condition.
No, they don't.
That is not typically Amish at all.
I was wondering that when I get married, what are the chances of me having children who will be dwarves?
The chance is virtually zero, because this condition is inherited as a recessive, which means that you have the gene in double dose. The gene must be present in double dose to cause the condition. The only way you can have an affected child is for the man you marry to be a carrier, and that's a very rare sort of thing. Of course, all of us carry a certain number of rare recessive genes in single dose that they don't do us any harm. Our children are no more often affected than they are because we don't marry someone who has the same particular recessive genes.
What about later generations, let's say grandchildren or great-grandchildren? Will that be carried on through?
Well, the gene is passed on down, but again, the only way it can express itself is to meet up with itself, as it were, in another carrier, so it isn't worth worrying about that either.
So, genetic studies in the Lancaster County Amish are contributing not only to a better understanding of rare inherited disorders, but also they're giving a very clear picture of the development of an isolated population. The cultural factors that hold them together seem to have been just as important as their genetic history in shaping their identity. What changes occur in future generations will depend on whether the Amish continue to intermarry, and on how successfully they withstand the pressures to become absorbed into modern society